Welcome back. I'm glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. For those that are just joining us, welcome on board. We are emboldened by your company, and it is the Kickstarter segment. We are looking at the International Day of Democracy, which is today, the 15th of September, and our question that is overriding at this moment is inclusive democracy for sustainable development. Democracy alone has been widely practiced across the globe, but in the last 30 years, questions have emerged as to whether it is actually compatible to the workings of African societies. So much so that many say the copy and paste model of democracy that many African countries have found themselves taking on is not sustainable, and calls have been emerging for a need to come up with a hybrid governance framework that can allow that the people's concerns, the issues that affect the population are attended to, while of course ensuring that governance runs smoothly. I have with me eminent persons who will be helping us understand this very, very important aspect of socio-economic development. With me is Philip Ankwasa Tumuhimbise. You are the Chairperson of the National Youth Council for Ntungamo District.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good one. I also have with me Mr. Robert Kigongo. He is one of the democracy champions that we have in the country, but he does a lot of work at the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs with regard to climate change and everything on the environment. Let me leave climate change there where it is. Perhaps during our discussions, democracy will find its way into it. First and foremost, what is International Day of Democracy? Let me put this question to Philip Ankwasa Tumuhimbise.
Thank you so much for having me here. Good morning, viewers. I'm Philip Ankwasa Tumuhimbise, Ntungamo District Youth Chairperson. Looking at this day, the International Day of Democracy, this owes its existence to the Universal Declaration on Democracy, which was adopted, which was adopted on September 15th, 1997, by the Inter-Parliamentary Union, the IPU, and Qatar led the efforts in making sure we have this day.
Okay. And
it was around 8th of November 2007 that the United Nations General Assembly adopted and established this day a resolution to support efforts of governments to promote and consolidate a new and restored democracies across the globe. Before we look at even just the International Day of Democracy, why are these days celebrated in the first place? These are days that are mainly celebrated to mobilize political will and resources for different concerns of the globe, different global concerns. For instance, now when it comes to democracy, we are seeing different challenges, and as an African continent, we ought to celebrate this day so that we recognize different issues and understand where are we when it comes to democracy as a continent. Where are we, and where are we heading, and what do we want as an African continent when it comes to achieving different different things in terms of democracy.
Okay, I understand the impetus that the day brings in that particular steed, and we shall be looking at exactly where we are as a continent a little bit later, including the fact that coups have become a little bit rampant. It's an onslaught on democracy itself. But allow me come to Robert Kigongo and look at the theme for this particular year: empowering the next generation, which the United Nations says is to encourage young people to get involved in democratic processes so they can have their voices heard. You are a young person yourself, and you have described yourself as a democracy champion. What are you championing?
Exactly. We all know democracy is the values of democracy are universal. But we are talking about inclusive democracy this year, where young people are more essential in safeguarding democracy.
Okay.
Amid authoritarianism and democratic backsliding, reports, especially from Freedom House, that I can quote from, state that the world's young people are withdrawing from political life, but are more engaging in civic life, organizing outside the political spheres. They are participating in protests, demonstrations, to have their voice heard more. So this day is about inclusive democracy, bringing young people to participate to the front, because they are a force to reckon on. Where we come from, the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs, we bring together young people of different spheres across political spectrum, from political shades, from different political shades, and we equip them, we train them how to participate in civic spaces. The challenge of this year, the challenge of democracy that we have, is the shrinking civic space. Without civic space, you can't participate in democratic processes. There is a crackdown on many of platforms where young people would have been participating. So we look at building more civic space, providing safe spaces where these young people can participate and have their voice heard. But also, young people and children should not be viewed as mere cheerleaders, but they are stakeholders. That's why we are saying they must be at the front line and in the headlines to champion democracy, because democracy is the bedrock of peace and sustainable development. And mind you, Chris, democracy is not a photocopy, as you've illustrated before. The values of democracy are universal. The link between democracy and human rights is indicated by Article 11 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we look at human rights issues, we look at rule of law, we look at Bill of Rights, freedom of expression, freedom to participate, peaceful assembly, we look at economic independence, we look at political tolerance. These are the things we want to look at in the perspective of democracy. So, and I want to remind young people, because as it has been indicated by Freedom House, they are withdrawing from political life, but engaging more in civic life.
Civic space.
Let me tell you, can you do without democracy? Impossible. Democracy is about participation. Literally, you are participating in making your own decision, in selecting managers that will shape policies for you, that will make policies for you. You are choosing a manager who will choose the taxes, the rates of taxes you are supposed to pay on the commodities that you are trading in. You are choosing a manager who will choose what kind of quality healthcare you're supposed to receive. You are choosing a manager who will determine what kind of education are you supposed to have in the country. So all these factors affect us in our real life. So democracy and politics at large, or political life, is about our own life. So with young people withdrawing from politics, we want to encourage you on this day. We want you to renew your commitment to participate in political life as you participate in civic life. You find many young people shaping ideas in civic life. Last year we had the Entebbe young people participated on social media, largely, let's say, on TikTok, and they had to shape that idea. So there was so much change in the way Entebbe Airport operates. They participated in the Kampala potholes on Twitter and other new media platforms. So they shaped the narrative. There was some bit of, the authorities listened, the policymakers listened, and there was 6 billion that was allocated to repairing roads in Kampala. So this is how we want you to participate. You are participating in the issues that actually affect you, your communities, and we don't want you to withdraw from politics or from democratic processes.
Okay, interesting there. Philip, I would like to engage you and build on to what Robert Kigongo says. The reluctance by some youth to enter the spaces where democracy can be entrenched and they participate more, yet at the same time being active in civic spaces. One could look at it as a contradiction. What is causing this kind of disconnect where people don't want to be part of what they are pushing in another way? For example, like technology has enabled many youth to have a voice, even when it is not, how can I describe it? The voice is not amalgamated, but anyone can say anything or can push from the comfort of their home on the mobile phone. The collective power of that, if brought together, is enormous. Is it that youth don't understand, don't appreciate that power and how to use it for good and to be able to entrench themselves into the democracy spaces? What is the case study in Ntungamo and how do you engage the young ones there?
Thank you so much. I would like to thank my colleague Kigongo for those different issues that he was raising. If we could understand as young people, and actually if we could work together, we have enormous power to change a lot of things in this nation. Okay. And you know, it's unfortunate that actually few young people understand and even recognize the importance and efforts of structures and organizations like this that I'm coming from, the National Youth Council organization and other councils like that. When you look at the National Youth Council, for example, this is a structure that stems right from the village level, whereby young people could not just, like, they couldn't just, like what he was saying, involve themselves in the civic spaces, but rather fully engage themselves in the politics of this nation, right from the village level up the national level.
There's something that can allow them make decisions.
That could allow them actually be in spaces where they can be able to make decisions and be heard and change different issues concerning young people in this nation. This is a structure, for example, that is, I normally call it a nursery bed of future leadership of this nation. So I really want to call upon my fellow young people to be brave enough, because though there are different issues, for example, like the cost of these things, it's not something cheap to get in these systems. It's so costly. You know, galvanizing and mobilizing the whole village, for example, just even be on a village committee, then later on be on a parish committee, then some county committee, then the district committee, then the national committee. It's something that is extremely costly. But of course it takes bravery and understanding what do we want as young people. We can't just be comfortable on our keyboards and hold our hands. We have to come up in these places to see how best can we change these things. How best, like what he was saying. Because politics can make or break a nation, for example. Political leaders, they can make or break a nation. They determine even what you're going to drink. If you look at if you look at things, so it's really upon us as young people to understand that we are the ones to be affected. The fact that one, we are the majority of the populace and we are still young, so naturally we still have more years on earth. So it's upon us that we cannot just put all these things on those that are living life, but rather to ourselves that are coming into life. Yes, so I want to really call upon my fellow young people to understand that and recognize that fact, that we have to involve ourselves in these democratic spaces, not just the civic spaces that he was trying to talk about.
Okay, the changing patterns of the aspirations of youth in Africa, it's a bit problematic when you want to understand what the yester generation wanted, what those who have grown up in what is no doubt a very techie, savvy environment want, and what kind of aspirations those who are now 5 years will want in the future. One can say it's an inability of the older generation to actually want to define this particular narrative. Youth will struggle to define it for themselves because everyone is working on what they want at that particular moment in time. And you can't really blame the youth for wanting what they want when they want it. But to be able to draw a plan, a blueprint for the longer term could be something that we can depend entirely on the older persons. Robert Kigongo, in your interaction with the various stakeholders within the spaces that you operate in, is there a genuine interest in working on the aspirations of the youth? Why am I saying a genuine? Because when policy rollout does not cause the kind of change that people expect, then we begin to think that perhaps there is not a genuine concern in the formulation and implementation of these particular policies. Have you contested that? Or if you have, what has been the response on the part of the policymakers who are evidently very, very old? That one we must be able to agree.
Chris, whether the political leaders of yesterday or now bring young people on table to discuss, but we must be cognizant of the fact that for the first time in the history of this universe, we have the world's young population under the age of 24 in the history at any point in time. So this force can actually be have an extraordinary potential to push for their own agenda, what they want to do. So leaders follow what citizens want. If the citizens have a unanimous voice, if those young people come together and demand for what they want, because it's their duty to shape their own future.
Yes.
So they must put up a voice to push the leaders to do what they want. If you realize how things are moving in this country, or even countries, the decisions that are being made are out of the public gallery. What the citizens want, the drumbeat that you make, leaders change their policies according to the drumbeat. So it's upon you young people to come up with your own drumbeat, the theme of your drumbeat. The leaders will follow. It will attract political will. The willing will attract the unwilling. The willing young people will attract the unwilling policymakers to follow the tune of what they want, to shape their own future, to shape the ideas, the policies that they want as they want to be implemented. Okay. We've seen various examples. Many young people have stepped up to actually be in the spaces, to be key decision makers. We have Mwine Mpaka in the 11th Parliament. He is shaping ideas. He's a young person.
That's right.
We have another young person in the environmental spaces. We have Hilda Nakawi shaping ideas in the UN conferences. We have Vanessa Nakate shaping climate conversations. We have Shamim Nabuma shaping ideas in the health care disparities within Africa and food security systems. We have Musili David leading demonstrations to shape ideas, especially the high commodity prices, where the demonstration that he led, it was able to attract a conversation in Parliament and in the public. So there are some young people, but few of them have had courage to actually...
Good enough. I was just going to ask you about the courage to do some of the things. When you speak about the likes of Vanessa Nakate and all her peers that are working within the spaces that are available to them, you forget that there are millions of youth in the far-flung rural areas who have the energy but don't have the spaces within which to act. Now that completely defeats the purpose of whatever aspirations they're trying to push, and they begin to resign to themselves. Now that means the youth leaders who are within the spaces where the resources are available, the momentum is well up, you should be able to catch and bring those ones who are unable to come into these spaces on board. How are you doing that? I need to find out exactly what the strategy is to allow for those that are not advantaged, as the Vanessa Nakates of this world are, to be able to be players in this particular drive.
Thank you so much. One, it's upon us first as young people. It's not like there are resources available, for example.
Okay.
Like in the space that we are in, myself as a district youth chairperson, but rather these are platforms. that we are availed. We will normally get different platforms to hold, for example, district youth councils, where we might share ideas from different sub-county representatives about these different things. We get different platforms and move down and look at these young people. We have also the how do I call it? To be able to to come to Kampala and lobby. We have the lobbying capacities. So it's upon us. It's not like we have the empowerment. It's not like we are fully empowered to do this, to be inclusive, to include all these young people out there, but rather
have the potential.
To have the potential. But if you use the different spaces that we are in, the lobbying capacities, the platform that we availed, we get different organizations. Like, for example, where he's coming from, we involve them in different programs. They come and help us finance and empower different programs where different young people are coming up, not just in politics, but even in technology, in other different spectrums where they share ideas that actually affect them, and they end up getting opportunities to be able to bring upon what they are thinking or what they are having in mind. So we are using these different platforms and lobbying capacity that we avail ourselves in to mobilize different young people for these different programs, mobilize different stakeholders, like where he's coming from, and other civil societies, other civil organizations, non-government organizations that normally come on board and help us involve these different young people who might be having the ideas, but don't have the spaces,
to
and the capacities to be able to bring upon these things.
Okay, that's a huge challenge, and leads me into something related. The greater number of youth are grappling with unemployment. They're grappling with the adverse effects of climate change induced adversaries, including that leads to migration and displacement, where they can no longer access basic services, including education. That disruption alone is enough to deter somebody's aspirations on the political space. The harsh economic conditions, inability to afford basic goods and services, many of them, perhaps instead of concentrating on the democratic processes and how the politics of the day plays, are simply grappling to put something on the table and have something to eat. For leaders, including the likes of Robert Kigongo and you, Mr. Ankwasa, when you are engaging them, do you think it is a quick fire and better approach to first attend to the things that they are grappling with first? Because me, when I was still within the docket of youth, that is, if 18 to 30, is it 18 to 35?
Yeah.
Is anything to go by? I'm well beyond 35, so I'm Mzee. When I was in that docket, I was reluctant to pay attention to calls to be active in spaces that are political, because I was grappling with the economic aspects of the day. And in my mind, I would say, how can I put myself in the political arena when I'm failing economically?
As an individual.
As an individual. Because the politics of the day, they say a hungry man is an angry man. Enlighten us on how you are helping youth on that.
One, by survival instincts, you have to eat. You know that you have to eat. By human nature survival instincts,
you have to
find food,
yes.
In all ways possible, whether by hook or crook. So these conditions that we live in must be the force behind us to participate in politics. Because it's about us. Chris, me starving or staying hungry pushes me to participate in the key political affairs of this country. For example, if I look at the basic food that the vulnerable communities, which we refer to as the ghetto, they survive on Rolexes, they survive on chapatis. What leads today, a chapati is 1,000 shillings, one single one. What has led to the price to the price increase
shooting up
of shooting up. We look at the underlying factors. Some of them could be actual exorbitant taxes imposed on wheat. So I must participate in peaceful demonstrations, in participation. I must participate in, I must go and contest. I must show up, show them that I'm present here. I'm here to participate in democratic processes. I applaud the previous 2021 elections. It presented many young people in the history of Uganda. I will give this credit to the Honorable Chagulanyi, who encouraged them to step up and participate. So you can realize that many of them are in councils, many of them are in parliament. So what they should do, they should encourage more young people to come and take up these spaces and be the change that they want to see. That's the only way how we can push the leaders, how we can push the policies that we want to be. We must be in those spaces. If you have to be the MP of Ntungamo, come and contest. Show them, show presence. Nobody will know that you want to unless you come up. So whoever is listening, it's upon you to step up. It's upon you to come up. It's upon you to show them that I'm here, I've come, I've arrived. Like the way Emperor Caesar said, the die is cast. I'm not going back. I'm here.
I'm here.
All right, very interesting. Now let me transition to the global scene, and then we try to work out exactly how democracy that rolls out in nations that celebrate it in its what appears to be its most beautiful form, vis-a-vis countries, especially in the global south, that are being required to entrench a democracy. Practices including the periodic holding of elections and, of course, ensuring that civic space is allowed to thrive in order to condition the kind of discourse around the politics of the day. The United States is a model. India is a model. The UK and all these other countries. But over the last 10 years, the conduct of politics in these countries has brought some sort of eye-opening scenarios and the need to ask new and emerging questions on how best we can do construct our democratic processes. This has been dealt a blow by the wave of military interventions in governance. Other people want to call them coups. I don't want to call them coups because coups are happening on a daily basis in the economics and in society. What we see, we already see institutional coups happening by governments that are democratic or elected into power democratically. So this whole perspective offers for a new thinking in going forward. When you look at what's happening on the African continent, vis-a-vis the shocks that powerful democracies have faced in the last 10 years, what do you see as the best possible approach for African countries and societies? Most importantly, when you say countries, it could be a little bit difficult. Let's say societies. What do you see as the best possible way forward?
One, when we look at what's been happening across the world, there is this cultural globalization that has been taking place.
It's a renaissance.
Yes, and it has brought up, it has brought upon different unpowered iniquities in Africa, where people's behaviors has now, we are more into self-interests. We are more into individualism. Yeah, different. It's
if I'm comfortable, if I'm peaceful, if my environment is okay to wake up to, there is no reason to mind the greater.
And that behavior as individuals, we are seeing we're now seeing it in communities. And this has affected Africa so much that from that as an individual to the communities, different African states, we're just looking at where am I comfortable, like. So long as it's about it's all about me. It's all about me. It's all about me, and that has pushed the efforts to have a one African continent, to be able to challenge different, or to even have a bargain in the geopolitical competition that has been happening in this world. So, looking at that, the geopolitical competitions that have been happening today in the world, whereby we are seeing different Western powers, you know, these superpowers, the ones that you've been talking about, the USA and this UK, Germany. Then we have these middle small powers, Turkey,
that are also finding their spaces.
That are different, you know, that are finding their spaces.
Their own political systems are questionable,
so
but
many
they
things.
survive and go.
They survive. And you are talking of what's been happening in Africa, the coups. This is all because of the interferences that stem from the geopolitical competitions that we've been seeing. So it's upon us as African societies to now sit back and think, what do we want as Africa? Where do we fall? To decolonize our minds in a certain way. To first understand also ourselves, our interests. Because whatever is coming upon us as Africa from these different powers, it's upon their own interests. So as an African continent, as African societies, we have to first do away with our own selfish interests and now think as African societies, what do we want? What is in our best interests for us to even be able to sit on table and have and bargain with these different powers of the world. Because if you know, that's all about decolonizing our minds as African societies. If we don't do that, because normally you might ask us, you might ask yourself, as an African society, have we recognized, for example, what's our economic power? Do we even understand the average earnings of an individual and the average earnings of a homestead in an African society? Like, we need to first look at those different things and understand our major interests as an African society, for us to even be able to sit and not be affected by different selfish interests of these different superpowers of the world.
Okay. What I see is a continent and a set of societies that have a multiplicity of challenges in achieving democracy as we know it, or it ought to be. There's something you spoke about which is very interesting. Interests. Do we know our interests as Africans? Within the workings of the Sustainable Development Goals, these are targets that have been largely set by the Western world.
Where are they even set from? We have a say as an African society.
So many times, when these strategies are laid out for the global south, they come within the workings of democracy. Do you meet, or are you trying to ensure that the tenets of democracy are attended to as a government? Then push this, push the other, and push that. But again, there are interests that are behind. What we are seeing right now is a contradiction between governance, economic well-being, and the cultural setup. When people celebrate coups, and these coup leaders immediately go on to transform the way the interaction with the Western powers is, then you begin to ask yourself, could it be fine that democracy be tested in the way it's being tested? A kilogram of uranium right now in Niger and these other countries is going at 200 euros?
Yeah, 200
It's been
euros.
going for 0.8 cents. Now, that shift alone represents an availability of economic power that can be the lever for the political entrenchment of the democracy that we want. Let me leave that to the man who is working with SDGs and everything.
And when we talk about African renaissance in the age of globalization, we literally mean revitalization and development of African countries in the global context. It is driven by factors like economic growth factor, political stability, global coalitions, We are looking at regional integrations. We have an opportunity of the African Union. It's not just the African Union. Today, African Union is a member of the G20. I think this is we are on the right course of Africa readiness in the global context.
We call that sit this year,
Yes.
I think.
Let's look at the economic aspect.
It was even long overdue.
African countries are now, let's look at the economic aspect. Africa is exporting 661 billion US dollars. There is an increment of 30%, now that is 2022. There is an increment of 30% from 2021, where we are exporting 506 billion US dollars
worth of goods.
Yeah. But the unfortunate part, there are only 5 countries that are contributing
responsible for
53%
of that.
of that. And that's South Africa, Angola, Nigeria, Algeria, and Egypt. But what is the main export? What do we export? Because for us to be in that global context, what are we putting on table? What are we putting on the table of the G20? We are putting there our natural resources. We are looking at petroleum is our leading export. Gold, diamond. Uranium is not listed anywhere, but it's one of our leading exports. We look at the agricultural commodities that we are exporting. We have coffee. It's unfortunate that Uganda and Ethiopia and DRC and other countries have not been able to match what Brazil exports, even when Brazil is facing climate catastrophes like earthquakes. So we have to shift our focus to the global outlook. We have to shift our focus to the global contestation. That's where we must do benchmarks, global benchmarks. We can benchmark on China. How has China managed to penetrate these other countries and thrive and compete with the likes of United States, with the likes of European countries, with the likes of Japan? China invested a lot in education. What they did, they sponsored many of their children or young people in the US universities. They did labor export in the American companies. So when they returned back to China, they had gained the knowledge from, today when you go to Harvard, China has a separate hostel. The Chinese have a separate hostel. Donald Trump tried to contest it, but they are bringing in a lot of money.
That is right.
So these economic aspects, they've increased the foreign exchange in the African countries. They've boosted foreign investments. Let's look at Uganda alone. Uganda have CIPLA quality chemicals. CIPLA is a result of foreign investment because CIPLA is in the USA and in China. When Gilbert Bukenya was still the vice president, he was much exposed. So what he did, he carried his friend Chitaka, FX Chitaka, and the son-in-law Katongole to India to see how CIPLA operates. Today, CIPLA is supplying the whole of Africa as a pharmaceutical leading company. So that foreign investment is what we should look at. We should focus.
And that brings me to Mr. Philip Ankwasa for the last word. Whether democracy as a pursuit or as an end in itself is not what we should be going for, but socio-economic transformation. When, for example, you look at some parts of the Middle East, these countries have concentrated on empowering themselves economically, so much so that the discussion for the need for democracy does not even appear anywhere. Maybe Africa can take the same route. We can discuss democracy at a certain time. Let's first work on the economics of the day. In 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. Now, about that, right now, the course that African societies have taken since 900, it's now quite difficult for us to take the path like what has been happening in the Middle East.
We are already distorted.
We're already distorted. So we have to recognize the need for democracy. And looking at what's been happening, for example, in Africa today, that we didn't really go deep into that's the coups that have been happening. I want us to recognize the strength of systems in East and South and Southern Africa. The strength that that democracy has really taken root, and that is for sure, if you look at the fastest growing economies today, majorly you will see the likes of Ethiopia, Uganda here, Rwanda, Tanzania. Majorly you will see East African and southern African countries. So it really takes us the fact that we actually need stronger democracies, stronger democratic systems
to drive
economic growth in Africa.
All right. Philip Ankwasa Tumuhimbise, Youth Chairperson of the National Youth Council Ntungamo District Chapter. Many thanks for the perspective, and many thanks to you too. Robert Kigongo, who is a democracy champion, but also one of the leading activists at the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs, for that perspective on democracy. And of course, like they said earlier, today is International Day of Democracy. Take time and International
Day of Democracy.
Of democracy.
Chris, before you send us off.
Before, I'm afraid I will have to send you off. All right, we shall be going for a break, but do stay with us. Morning at NTV still continues. We have a lot of time to be able to share a lot more. Stay with us. I'll be right back.